Part 1. The letter I didn't want to read. I never wanted to be that guy. The one who snoops, who digs into things he's better off not knowing. I used to think that trust was enough, that if things were wrong, they'd be obvious. But life doesn't always work like that, does it? Sometimes, you don't see the cracks until the whole thing comes crashing down. It started with a letter. A letter I wasn't meant to read, but did anyway. I was sitting in my usual corner at the coffee shop when I noticed it. The letter was small, neatly folded, and had the unmistakable look of a personal note, something private. It wasn't mine, but I couldn't help but notice the name on the front. It wasn't the name of anyone I knew, yet something about it felt familiar. The handwriting was sharp, confident, almost too perfect. And for reasons I still can't explain, my curiosity got the best of me. I didn't open it right away. In fact, I told myself I wouldn't. But every time I tried to focus on something else, my eyes kept returning to it. I thought, what harm could there be? It's not like I'm going to read it. But those few words written on the outside pulled me in. And once I had seen that name, I couldn't shake it. Finally, I couldn't resist. I unfolded the paper just to catch a glimpse, and, just like that, I saw it. Meet me at the usual place. We can't keep doing this in the open. It was brief, to the point, and that was it. But the effect was instant. The world around me seemed to slow down. I felt my heart race, my palms sweat. Something deep inside told me that this was important. I tried to put the letter down, but the words wouldn't leave my head. I had to know. Who was it from? Who was this meant for? I asked the barista if anyone had left it behind. She gave me a strange look, but I just shrugged it off. She said no one had claimed it, and she didn't seem bothered by it at all. But the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I pocketed the letter, thinking maybe I could figure it out later. Maybe it wasn't my business. But what was it doing here in the first place? How could I walk away without finding out? As I stepped out of the coffee shop, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my partner, something about work. But all I could think about was the letter. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I didn't want to know. But now, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't erase that strange feeling gnawing at me. The next day, I went back to the coffee shop, hoping to find the letter still there, hoping maybe I could just leave it and pretend like I hadn't read it. But no, it wasn't there. It was gone. And I don't know why, but I felt relieved. Maybe I had dodged something, avoided opening Pandora's box. But as I left the shop, I realized that relief was just an illusion. The truth wasn't in that letter. It was somewhere else. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. The feeling of unease never left. I couldn't go back to normal. So, I decided to follow the lead. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I was looking for something. Anything that would explain the sensation of danger, of having crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. So, I retraced my steps. I found myself at the location mentioned in the letter. It was an ordinary street, with no obvious signs, no big clues. Just a small, discreet building that looked like any other on the block. But something about it felt wrong, and I couldn't shake the nagging thought that I was walking into something much bigger than I had bargained for. I stayed across the street, hidden in the shadow of a storefront. I watched. It felt like hours before anything happened. And then, just as I was about to give up, I saw them. Two people, walking into the building together, their faces hidden behind the reflection of the glass door. The woman, who I didn't recognize, smiled, and the man beside her, he I knew. It was my partner. I thought I had seen enough. But when the door shut behind them, I felt like I had just stumbled into something I wasn't ready for. I should have left. But instead, I waited. I don't know why, but I did. It felt like I had been drawn into this tangled web I didn't want to be in. And the more I waited, the more I wondered. What had I just uncovered? What was I about to lose? Part 2. The shadow I couldn't shake. The minutes dragged on as I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the building across the street. I could see the shadows of their figures through the frosted glass, moving in tandem, but I couldn't make out their faces. I felt like a ghost, caught in a moment where I didn't belong, watching something unfold that I had no right to witness. But I couldn't leave. I stayed for a while longer, fighting the urge to confront them right then and there, but I knew I wasn't ready for that. I had no evidence, just an overwhelming feeling that I was about to uncover something that could change everything. I wasn't sure I was prepared for that kind of truth. Eventually, the door opened, and they walked out. My partner, Jason, was the first to step out, his back straight, looking focused as always. The woman was walking just behind him. She was dressed in a way that looked too deliberate, too elegant for a casual meeting. But it was the way they interacted that caught my attention. She touched his arm, just lightly, like they were comfortable with each other. I knew that touch. I'd seen it before, seen it in movies, read about it in books. But seeing it in real life, between them, felt like a punch to my stomach. Jason wasn't just working with her. He wasn't just having a friendly meeting with her. This was something else. And the feeling that had been gnawing at me, the one I'd tried to ignore, intensified. It was all starting to piece together, but not in the way I had hoped. I watched them walk away together, my mind racing with questions I wasn't ready to answer. What had I just seen? What was really happening between them? Was I just being paranoid, or was there something more? I didn't follow them. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to confront them just yet, but I knew I couldn't stop thinking about it. The image of them together lingered in my mind, replaying over and over. I had to know more. I had to dig deeper. But I also knew that opening this door I wasn't supposed to open, meant stepping into a world I couldn't undo. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions of my everyday life, pretending like everything was fine, pretending I hadn't seen what I had. But deep inside, I knew I was lying to myself. I couldn't look at Jason the same way anymore. Every conversation, every touch, every glance felt hollow. There was a tension in the air, a weight that neither of us acknowledged, but I could feel it. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. Maybe it was just a business thing. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. But deep down, I knew I couldn't let it go. I started looking through his things. It felt wrong, like an invasion of his privacy. But I had to know. I found nothing unusual in his desk. No hidden letters, no secret messages. But there was one thing that stood out. A receipt from a restaurant I didn't recognize. It was dated just a few days before the meeting I'd witnessed. I stared at it for what felt like hours. The name of the restaurant wasn't one I would have expected him to go to. It was small, intimate, the kind of place you go for a quiet dinner with someone important. But it wasn't the type of place he and I usually went to. We were more the casual dining type. I checked the address on my phone and found it was only a few blocks from the building I had seen them leave. I couldn't ignore the connection anymore. My gut was telling me what my mind didn't want to hear. Jason was lying to me. And there was something much bigger going on than I could have ever imagined. I sat there in silence, the weight of the truth settling in. I could confront him. I could demand answers. But what if I was wrong? What if I ruined everything by acting on a hunch? What if, in the end, I was just making things worse? I wasn't ready for the fallout. I wasn't ready to have my life torn apart. But every time I thought about letting it go, the image of that woman, the way she touched his arm, came back to me. It was like a loop, a cycle that I couldn't break. I couldn't stop now. I had to keep going, even if it meant uncovering a truth I wasn't ready to hear. I decided to follow him the next day. I knew where he would be, and I couldn't just sit back anymore. I had to find out the truth for myself. It wasn't a matter of trust anymore. It was about me and my need to know. What was he hiding? And why did it feel like my whole world was starting to crumble? As I made my way to the place where I knew Jason would be, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. This was it. The moment where everything would either fall into place or completely fall apart. Part 3. The Unseen Truth. I knew following him wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't some detective or spy. I wasn't used to sneaking around. But something inside me had shifted. I couldn't let it go. There was no way I could look Jason in the eye again without knowing the truth. So, the next morning, I followed him. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had to see where he was going, what he was doing. My heart raced as I parked a few blocks away from his office. I waited in my car, watching him as he stepped out of the building, just like any other day. His expression was calm, but I couldn't help but feel that there was something different in the way he moved, something off. He got into his car, and I waited a beat before starting mine. It wasn't hard to follow him. He wasn't driving quickly, just going about his usual routine. The streets felt emptier than usual, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already too deep into something I shouldn't be involved in. He drove to a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town, a place I had never seen him go to before. I parked a little ways down the street and watched him walk inside. At first, I thought he was just grabbing a drink, maybe catching up with a colleague. But when I saw him sit down at one of the tables with none other than that woman, the one I had seen him with before, I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just a casual meeting. They were sitting close, whispering to each other, their heads leaning in as if they were sharing a secret. The way she smiled at him, the way his hand brushed against hers, it was the kind of intimacy I knew all too well. The kind that shouldn't have been shared with someone who wasn't me. I felt the rage build inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't confront them, not here, not now. Not when I had nothing concrete to accuse him of. But I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. The way they interacted was all too familiar, and yet, I was being shut out of it. I wasn't a part of it. I was just the guy on the outside looking in. I stayed hidden in my car for what felt like hours. Every time they laughed, every time their eyes met, it felt like another piece of my trust in him was shattered. But I couldn't leave. Not without knowing the full story. I had to see where this went. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they stood up. Jason kissed her on the cheek, a soft, intimate kiss, and walked out the door. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. They weren't just friends. They weren't just business partners. This was something more, and I knew it. I had no idea how long it had been going on, but I could feel the weight of the betrayal settling over me. I couldn't let him get away with this. I couldn't let him keep lying to me, keep pretending everything was fine. I followed them again, my heart thundering in my chest. It wasn't the smartest move. I knew that. But at that moment, I didn't care. I needed answers, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get them. They drove together to a small, secluded park on the outskirts of town. It was a place I didn't recognize, one that felt far removed from our usual hangouts. They parked the car and got out, walking side by side toward the wooded area. I couldn't let them out of my sight. I followed, staying far enough behind that they wouldn't notice me, but close enough that I could hear their voices if they spoke. My breath caught in my throat as I watched them disappear into the trees, the sun beginning to set behind them. And then, they stopped. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the way Jason was holding her hand, the way they were standing so close. My stomach twisted as I realized what was happening. They weren't just talking. They were sharing something I wasn't a part of, something I had never known about. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, watching them. But then, something inside me snapped. I couldn't stay hidden anymore. I couldn't just watch from the sidelines while they carried on like nothing was wrong. I took a step forward, my foot crunching loudly on a twig. I cursed under my breath, but it was too late. They turned around, their faces filled with surprise as they saw me standing there. Jason's expression shifted instantly. His face went pale, and for a split second, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. The woman's eyes widened, and I could see the shock on her face as well. She stepped back, as if she were trying to distance herself from the situation. But it was too late. I had seen everything I needed to see, and I was done pretending I didn't know. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. "What's going on here, Jason?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. The silence between us felt suffocating, thick with tension. And then, finally, he said something that made my heart sink further. "It's not what you think, I swear." But the look in his eyes, his guilt, his avoidance, told me everything I needed to know. And just like that, I knew. This was only the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. Part 4. The Confession. I stood there, a few feet away from Jason and the woman who had become a part of my world without my knowledge. My mind was spinning, but my heart was clear. I needed answers. The lie that had been building between us was now like a weight hanging over my chest, suffocating me, demanding to be addressed. Jason's gaze darted between me and the woman beside him, his face contorting with a mixture of panic and guilt. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out at first. The silence stretched between us like an eternity. Every second felt like an hour, the tension hanging in the air thick enough to choke on. The woman, her expression shifting from shock to concern, finally spoke. "We didn't mean for you to find out like this," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I think you have a right to know now." I looked at her, confused. "What is this? Who are you? What's going on here?" Jason took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. "Her name is Natalie," he began, his voice low. She's been helping me with a project. A project that got complicated. A project. It sounded so casual, so innocent. But the look in his eyes told me everything. There was nothing simple about this. "And the rest of it?" I asked, my voice trembling, fighting to keep my composure. "The meetings, the dinners, The secret messages? What's been going on between you two? Jason opened his mouth, but he paused, as if searching for the right words. I could see it. The hesitation, the fear of what was coming next. He wasn't ready to face the truth, but I was already beyond the point of holding back. Yes, we've been seeing each other, he finally confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. I never meant for it to happen, but it did. It was as if the ground beneath me cracked open, the words falling into my mind, shattering any pretense of the life I thought I had. You've been seeing her? How long? I barely managed to get the words out. 6 months, he said, his voice thick with shame. It wasn't planned. We started working on this project together, and then, one thing led to another. I never meant to hurt you. 6 months, I repeated, my voice hollow. 6 months of lies, of stolen moments, of betrayal that I hadn't seen coming. It was the perfect storm of deception, one I never thought I'd be caught in. I had trusted him with everything. We had built our lives together, or so I thought. But as I stood there, staring at the two of them, I realized how little of it had been real. The trust, the love, had it all been an illusion? Was this the consequence of loving someone so completely that you never questioned their actions, their words, their loyalty? I turned away from them, unable to look at either of them any longer. The anger that had been simmering inside me was now boiling over, but it wasn't just anger. It was pain. It was a betrayal so deep I couldn't even wrap my mind around it. Why? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Why would you do this to me, Jason? After everything? I gave you everything. Jason stepped forward, his hand reaching out to me, but I took a step back, instinctively recoiling from him. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just happened. It just happened, I echoed, shaking my head in disbelief. That's your excuse? That's the reason for everything? I thought we were partners, Jason. I thought you were someone I could trust. Natalie remained silent, watching the exchange between us, her face unreadable. I could see the guilt in her eyes too, but I didn't care about her guilt right now. She was just as responsible as Jason was. She had known about me, known I existed, and yet she chose to be a part of this betrayal. Jason's voice broke through my thoughts. I love you, he said, his eyes pleading. I never stopped loving you. But I've messed up. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I don't know how to fix it. His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I could see the remorse in his eyes, the regret. But it didn't change what had already happened. It didn't erase the lies, the hurt, the destruction of everything I thought we had. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, the words heavy on my tongue. How do I forgive someone who's done this to me? How do I trust you again? How do I go back to the way things were? Jason fell silent, his eyes filling with tears. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I cut him off. I need space, Jason, I said, my voice cracking. I need to think. I need to be alone right now. I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing in the silence of the park. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't stay in that moment of pain and confusion. As I walked, I heard Jason's voice calling after me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had to get away from them, from everything that had just shattered my world. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let myself be part of this anymore. The trust was gone. The love was tainted. And I had to figure out how to move forward, even if I had no idea how to begin. Part 5. The decision I wasn't ready to make. The days that followed felt like a blur, a disorienting whirlwind I couldn't control. I stayed in my apartment, barely leaving except for the occasional trip to the store. I didn't want to see anyone, least of all Jason. The betrayal felt fresh, raw, like an open wound I couldn't ignore. The silence between us was deafening. He'd sent me dozens of messages, each more apologetic than the last. He begged for another chance, said he was willing to do anything to make things right. But the truth was, I didn't know if there was anything left to fix. Could you truly repair something that had been shattered so completely? Could I ever trust him again? I thought about the years we'd spent together, the good and the bad, and I wondered how much of it had been real. Had the love we shared been a lie? Or had I just been blind to the things happening right under my nose? Was I the fool, the one who chose to ignore the warning signs? The guilt weighed heavily on me. Jason had been my partner, my best friend. He had been the one I trusted most in this world. And now, all of that was gone. But in the midst of the chaos, one thought kept circling in my mind. What now? I couldn't stay here forever, drowning in my thoughts and my anger. I needed to make a decision, even though I wasn't ready. But deep down, I knew there was no way I could just go back to the way things were. There was no getting over it for me, not after what had happened. I decided to meet with Jason, not to forgive him, but to get the answers I needed. To make him understand the magnitude of what he had done, and to make him understand that this wasn't something that could be fixed with words alone. We met at the same coffee shop where everything had started, the place where I had first found that letter. It felt like the right place, somehow. A place where things had once been simple, before everything got so complicated. Jason was already sitting at a table when I arrived. He looked different now, like the man I had once known had faded away, replaced by someone broken, someone lost. When he saw me, his face lit up with hope, and for a moment, I thought maybe he was genuinely sorry. Maybe he was willing to fight for us. But then I remembered everything. The lies. The secrecy. The way he had looked at her the day I caught them. And I felt the coldness settle back into my chest. I sat down across from him, not saying a word. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like an old, familiar thing. Finally, he broke it. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice quiet, almost broken. "But I need you to know how much I regret everything. I've been a fool, and I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to explain. But I swear, I never meant for this to happen. It just did. And I hate myself for it." I looked at him, searching his face for any sign that he truly understood what he had done. But all I saw was guilt. Guilt and fear. "You keep saying you regret it," I said, my voice shaky, but steady. "But regret doesn't change anything. It doesn't erase the fact that you lied to me, that you betrayed my trust. You said you loved me, Jason. But how can you love someone and do this to them? How can you lie to their face, tell them you're one thing when you're clearly something else?" His eyes welled up with tears, and I could see the genuine pain in his expression. But it didn't matter. I couldn't just pretend everything was okay. I couldn't go back to the way things were. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my words coming out with a force I didn't know I had. "I can't keep pretending like everything's fine. You've shattered my trust. You've broken us." Jason reached out to me, his hand trembling, but I pulled away instinctively. I couldn't let him touch me. Not now. Not after everything. "I still love you," he said desperately, his voice breaking. "I'll do anything, I swear. Just tell me what you need. Tell me how I can make this right." I shook my head. "It's too late for that. I don't even know who you are anymore, Jason. I can't keep living in this lie. I deserve more than this." I stood up to leave, but Jason grabbed my arm, his grip firm but pleading. "Please, don't leave me like this," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please. We can fix this. I swear we can." But I couldn't fix it. I couldn't fix something that had been broken beyond repair. "Goodbye, Jason," I said quietly, pulling my arm out of his grasp. "I hope you find what you're looking for. But I'm done." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the door swinging closed behind me. And just like that, I left him, and the life we had built, behind. It wasn't easy. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for. But it was the only choice I had left. I didn't know what the future held, or if I would ever be able to trust again, but I knew one thing for sure. I was finally free from the lie. And that was enough for now. Part 6. The weight of moving on. It's strange, isn't it? How the end of something that was once so important can feel like both a relief and a weight. Walking away from Jason, leaving the life we built together, those were the right decisions, the necessary decisions. But as I walked through the streets, heading back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. The weight of the situation was still pressing down on me, but it wasn't just the anger or the betrayal that lingered. It was the realization that I had to start over. I had to rebuild my life from the ground up. The first few days after our meeting were a blur. Jason didn't contact me. His silence, while painful, was a relief in some ways. I needed space, and I was finally starting to feel like I could breathe again. But as the days passed, the reality set in. I was alone now. Alone in a way I hadn't been in years. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the constant thoughts of what had happened. But it didn't work. No matter how much I focused on my job or buried myself in distractions, there were still moments when my mind would wander back to him, back to us. I would picture our life before, all the shared moments, the late-night talks, the laughter. And I would wonder, was it ever real? Or had I just been blind to the truth? It wasn't just Jason I had to let go of. It was the version of myself I had been when I was with him. I had to accept that I'd been living in a shadow, trusting blindly, loving someone who hadn't been honest with me. And it wasn't easy. It was like stripping away a part of myself, a part that had defined who I was for so long. A week passed, and I thought I was starting to move on. I went out with friends, tried to get back into the routine of my life, but there was always that ache, the void where my trust in people used to be. I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever feel the same way about someone again. Would I ever be able to trust someone so completely? Was that even possible now? One evening, a phone call interrupted my thoughts. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. "Hello," I said, my voice uncertain. "Is this Candace?" The voice on the other end was soft, but there was a certain edge to it that made me sit up straighter. "Yes," I replied, wondering who this could be. "Who is this?" There was a long pause before the person spoke again, their voice quieter this time. "It's Natalie." I froze. The woman. The one I had seen with Jason. The one who had broken everything. My first instinct was to hang up, to pretend I hadn't heard it, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the curiosity, or maybe I just needed to hear her side of things. I didn't know, but I let her continue. "I know this might be unexpected," she began, her tone cautious, almost apologetic. "But I wanted to talk to you. I owe you an explanation." I didn't know what to expect from her, but I sure as hell wasn't expecting this. "Why now?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "After everything, why do you think I want to hear from you?" "I know you're angry," she said, and I could hear the regret in her voice. "And you have every right to be. But there are things you don't know, things that I need to explain." I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to hang up and forget about this woman who had come into my life uninvited, who had ruined everything I thought I knew. But another part of me wanted answers. I had no idea what had happened between them, what Jason had told her, or why she was reaching out now. "I'm listening," I said, reluctantly. There was a moment of hesitation on the other end before she spoke again. "I never meant to hurt you," she began. "I'm not saying I didn't make mistakes, but I never intended for things to get out of hand. Jason and it wasn't planned. We didn't go into it thinking it would turn into what it did. But I didn't want to hurt anyone." The words hit me harder than I thought they would. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout at her, ask her how she could be so blind to the pain she caused. But instead, all I felt was exhaustion. Exhaustion from everything. The lies, the betrayal, the weight of it all. "Then what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happened? Why him? Why not just walk away?" Another pause. "Because it was easier not to," she finally said, almost in a whisper. "We both got caught up in something we didn't know how to get out of. And by the time we realized how much we'd hurt you, it was too late to turn back." I didn't know what to say to that. "So what do you want from me?" I asked. "You think this conversation will fix everything?" "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said, her voice firm now. I wanted you to know the truth. Jason is sorry. He regrets everything. And I do too. But I don't expect you to forgive us. I just wanted to be honest with you." Her honesty, if you could even call it that, did nothing to soothe the anger and sadness I felt. It didn't make the betrayal go away. It didn't make me trust her or him. But it gave me one thing: closure. I realized then that I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need them to fix this. I didn't need them to make me feel better. What I needed was to move on, to stop letting their mistakes dictate my future. "I appreciate the honesty, Natalie," I said, my voice steady. "But this isn't something I can fix. I need to move forward, and I can't do that with either of you in my life anymore. Goodbye." I hung up the phone, the finality of it sinking in. There would be no more lies, no more trying to salvage something that was broken beyond repair. I was done. I was free. The weight I had carried for so long began to lift as I walked out of my apartment that evening. I didn't know where I was going or what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the one I needed. Part 7. The Quiet Aftermath. A week had passed since the phone call with Natalie, and it felt like a lifetime. The air in my apartment was thick with uncertainty, yet somehow, it felt lighter than it had in months. Jason's messages had slowed, and I'd stopped checking them. The silence was like a blessing, a momentary reprieve from the chaos. But deep down, I knew it was only temporary. The questions I'd buried in my mind began to resurface. Could I really move on? Could I rebuild my life without dragging the past along with me? I hadn't seen Jason since that day in the park, and part of me didn't want to. I couldn't escape the reality that he wasn't the man I thought I knew. Everything about him felt tainted now, like the version of him I had loved had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. The idea of seeing him again made my chest tighten, and yet I knew I couldn't keep avoiding it forever. I spent the next few days focusing on myself. I threw myself into work, started picking up old hobbies I'd neglected, and tried to reconnect with friends I'd pushed away. It wasn't easy, but little by little, I felt like I was finding myself again. For the first time in a long time, I was making decisions for myself, without considering anyone else. And as selfish as it seemed, I welcomed the freedom. It was on a rainy Thursday evening when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message from Jason. It wasn't even a number I recognized. Hesitantly, I picked up. "Hello," I said, my voice low, cautious. "Candace, it's me." "Jason," he said, his voice shaky, the familiar tone laced with regret. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I had prepared myself for this moment, but I still wasn't ready. "I told you, Jason." I started, my voice steady but cold. "I don't want to hear from you anymore. I need space to figure things out. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to talk." "Please, just hear me out," he begged. "I know I've messed up, I know that. But this isn't how I wanted it to end. I need you to know I've been seeing a therapist. I've been doing the work. I can't move on without you." I felt my anger flare again, but I swallowed it down. "Jason," I said, taking a deep breath, "you've had months to fix this. You've had years, really. I don't need you to tell me you're sorry anymore. I don't need the excuses. What I need is for you to accept that it's over. I'm moving on with my life, and you need to do the same." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, but no words came out. I wanted to feel pity for him, to tell him that everything would be okay, but I knew better than that. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. "I understand," Jason finally said, his voice breaking. "I won't call you again. I had to try, one last time. I hope you find happiness, Candace. I really do." I held the phone to my ear, the weight of his words settling on me. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, but it was the closure I needed. I had been waiting for an apology, for some grand gesture that would make everything okay again. But there was nothing left to fix. There was no going back. After a moment, I hung up, feeling the tension release from my shoulders. It was done. Jason was done, and I was finally starting to let go. The next few weeks were a blur of healing. Slowly, the pain faded, replaced by a quiet sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I spent more time with friends, went on hikes, and explored new places in the city. Every step forward was another piece of me reclaiming my life. One evening, as I walked through the park near my apartment, I ran into an old friend from work. His name was Evan, and we had worked together years ago, before all the chaos with Jason. We had always gotten along well, but life had pulled us in different directions. We caught up over coffee, and it felt nice to talk to someone who didn't know anything about my past relationship, someone who didn't carry the weight of my history. As we sat on the bench, laughing about old memories, something shifted. I didn't feel the same heaviness in my chest I used to feel when I was around men. I wasn't thinking about Jason or what had happened between us. For the first time in months, I was able to just be. Evan asked me if I wanted to go out for dinner later that week, and I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to start dating again, but something inside me told me I needed to say yes. I couldn't stay stuck in the past. I had to move forward. "I'd love to," I said, smiling for the first time in a long while. I realized in that moment that I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. I didn't know what it held, but I was ready for whatever came next. I wasn't going to let the mistakes of my past define me. I wasn't going to let Jason's betrayal control my life. And just like that, I began to rebuild. Piece by piece, I was starting to feel whole again. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, the rain had stopped, and the sun was beginning to set. The sky was a warm orange, and for the first time in months, I could see the horizon clearly. The road ahead was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to walk it. Part 8. The beginning of something new. The following months were a series of small victories, each one feeling like a tiny step toward reclaiming my life. It wasn't easy, but I had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about moving forward, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. Evan and I grew closer, and as we spent more time together, I realized that I wasn't just healing from the past. I was also learning how to open myself up again. Slowly, I began to feel things I hadn't felt in so long. Laughter that felt genuine, conversations that didn't carry the weight of old wounds, and a sense of comfort that wasn't built on secrets or lies. One day, a few months into our friendship, Evan took me to the same park where I had met him, the place where I had once felt so lost and broken. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over everything, and the air was crisp and clean. As we walked along the path, he stopped and turned to me, his eyes filled with warmth. "You know, Candace," he said, "I've really enjoyed getting to know you. You're an incredible person, and I'm glad you let me into your life." My heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in ages, I felt something stir inside me. Something soft, something real. "I'm glad you're here too," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I never thought I'd be able to trust anyone again, but you've made it easy. You've made me feel like I can be myself again." Evan smiled, and in that moment, I realized that I was no longer carrying the heavy burden of the past. The pain of the betrayal had faded into a distant memory, no longer ruling my every thought. Instead, I was standing in a place of possibility, of new beginnings. As the days passed, I kept finding little pieces of joy, moments of laughter, quiet evenings with Evan, and the growing realization that life could still be beautiful, even after all the heartache. I wasn't perfect, and neither was Evan, but together, we built something real. We spent weekends traveling, exploring new places, and finding joy in the simple things. Long walks, cozy cafes, and lazy Sundays spent reading. It was a new kind of love, one that wasn't built on perfection, but on honesty, respect, and understanding. I had learned so much from the pain of my past, and I wasn't going to let it define me. I had discovered my strength, my resilience, and my capacity to love again. And as I stood there in the park with Evan, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew one thing for sure. The future was mine to shape. No longer burdened by the past, I felt ready for whatever came next. Life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges our way, but I knew I had the strength to face them. I wasn't the same person I had been when Jason and I first met. I had grown, and I was proud of the person I had become. And as Evan reached out to take my hand, I smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter full of hope, love, and endless possibilities.